Proverbs 24:10. If you are slack in the day of distress, your strength is limited. Deliver those who are being taken away to death, and those who are staggering to the slaughter. Oh, hold them back. If you say, "See, we did not know this," does he not consider who weighs the hearts? And does he not know it who keeps your soul? And will he not render to man according to his work? That's Proverbs 24:10 through 12. Thank you for joining us for another installment of Theologic. I'm Zach Packey.
Zach Deacon.
Zach Attack, episode numero tres. Number three, the three of us. It's the two of us now. Sean is still in North Carolina, and he's going to be back in just probably about the end of the week. Right now we're recording, it's December 5th, and he's going to be back really soon. So
what do we do when what do we do if these episodes just fly off the shelf?
We bring Sean in too, right? It's gonna be the Zach Attack episode. So we would have to revisit that at another time. So we're gonna talk a little bit about ending abortion today. We've brought up in a couple episodes previously, just off the cuff, different ending abortion type of ministries. We brought up End Abortion Now, which is what Jeff Durbin and Apologia Church, that's kind of their main ministry. There's one that I thought had an interesting idea. It's called Save the Storks. Have you heard of Save the Storks before?
No,
Zach?
I haven't. Go ahead and explain that.
So basically, Save the Storks is what they do is they fund vans that do ultrasounds.
Oh, yeah, sure.
Right in front of abortion clinics. The statistics are that if about 90% of the time, if a young lady sees the baby, that the baby's alive and moving, she will not abort. And so that's their goal, is to end abortion by means not of huge open confrontation, but one life at a time, saving their children. And these are important things too. So we're going to talk about abortion itself and what it is. Zach has some really good things to bring out about Planned Parenthood and its history and the sort of philosophy that comes as a result of that. I'm going to talk a little bit about some things that people object to concerning our view, what they would say in against Christians and what they think that they're doing. So Zach, let's start by just bringing out kind of the first objection that I think the culture currently has to Christians. And maybe you're listening to this and you're pro-abortion, pro-choice. What I want to do is just kind of address some common objections. So here's the first one. You Christians just want to control women's bodies. That's the common objection, the common charge that is brought against that. I was listening to a conservative radio host, and they were helping me get into the mind of those who would make this accusation. And I think what we have to bottom line say is, actually, this is not about control. This is about legitimately seeing a moral evil that must be stopped. Let me put it this way. So we're in the midst of a culture that has had superhero movies galore from the past 20 years, right? The best superhero movies aren't the ones where there are girl bosses looking for their cut of the pie or whatever. They aren't the ones looking for power. That's actually the villain who's doing that. But what appeals to an ordered human soul is a strong and good man or woman laying his or her life down to save the innocent and end evil. And the reason is because it's good, it's right. It's what our hearts actually long for. We want to see that taking place. Evil needs to be opposed and resisted because we want to see a wonderful future that the hero is seeking to effect. Evil needs to be stopped because it's going to create great pain and hardship and turmoil and slavery for those that are involved in it. An ordered soul and an ordered heart wants to identify with that story. And so, by way of illustration, innocent babies are being slaughtered in the womb, and someone has to stop it. If you are listening to me and you are actually pro-abortion, please believe me, I'm not lying to you. This is the baseline desire that we have in ending abortion. Evil must be stopped. This is evil, and it needs to end.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point. Because pointing out the fact that it's evil allows us to point out the fact that the answer is Christ.
Right.
And that somebody who desires to murder their unborn child most likely does not fear God, does not have a heart that desires the things of Christ. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that a Christian woman who has made a mistake, was never tempted to go about this procedure, whether through coercion or because they maybe don't understand in the heat of the moment exactly what they're doing. Although I think that every woman understands exactly what's going on in the instance of abortion. It allows us, by calling out the evil again, it allows us to simply just say that this isn't two guys talking about telling women what they can or cannot do with their bodies, but to tell you that baby is made in the image of God, that God is knitting that child together in your womb or in the womb of its mother, and that it has life and value and dignity and worth because it is made in the image of God, and you can't kill it. Murder is wrong by God's standard and no one else's standard for that matter, but by God's standard it is murder, and therefore we present you with the evil, and we also present you with what can save you. We also present you with the message of hope and peace and reconciliation that though you wanted to kill this child, or perhaps went through with it, that Christ forgives and washes you clean.
And that's the beautiful part of it. When, as we're pointing out evil being opposed, we must point out how even those who are wrapped up in this evil can find redemption, forgiveness, grace, pardon, joy, peace, all these things that comes about as a result of the gospel. The gospel is the solution to stopping unborn babies from being killed, but it is also the solution that Christ's death and his resurrection paved the way for even the woman who has aborted her child to come to saving knowledge of Christ, be forgiven, cleansed, washed, and now eternally redeemed. And that's the solution.
No man on this side of glory is too far away from the gospel. It's too far away from God to save them in Christ.
Exactly. I have another answer to that. Again, the charge is Christians just want to control women's bodies. We have to be honest and say that even logically that doesn't work. That's not the woman's body.
Right. Yeah.
That's just not the woman's body.
Yeah, and I think that we have to understand too, I do say this kind of facetiously, but we're talking about abortion, so it's really not that funny. As a law enforcement officer, no person, man or woman, has ever been able to just do whatever they want with their own body.
And free from consequences.
Yeah, right. Yeah. You go take off all of your clothes and run naked down the middle of the street, and you tell me if you can go do whatever you want with your own body. You're going to get called in for running naked down the middle of the street, and you're going to get talked to by law enforcement. Go run naked through your local grocery store and tell me you don't get kicked out. Okay.
What's the charge for somebody? Is that indecent exposure?
I mean, it could be depending on what state you live in, or if there's a city statute or something like that. The point I'm making tongue in cheek is that to say that everybody can do whatever they want with their own body is just not a logical argument at all. That's never been the case.
Right. Yeah. It's not real. It's not true. And again, 99% of the time as well, what brought about that baby being conceived was a consensual act.
Yeah. And I think that the point you bring about is worth getting at too. Just earlier, the body inside of a woman's body is not her body. When she goes to the abortion clinic, she's not the one being murdered and thrown into a dumpster. And so that's not to say that we are not acknowledging that abortion doesn't have gross, disgusting side effects on the woman. It certainly does.
It does.
That's one of the reasons. One of the many arguments against having an abortion is that it actually has disastrous effects on a woman's body and her reproductive system, and it leads to consequences, a myriad of consequences downstream.
I love the irony you're bringing out, right? Because what's the common word? This is reproductive
freedom. Yeah.
And health.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's not healthy. Abortion is not healthy. It's not helping you engage in any type of reproductive freedom. It doesn't say that just because you have an abortion, you'll never be able to reproduce again. That's not what we're saying at all. But anybody who's honest with themselves, and anybody who takes an honest look at history, and anybody who takes an honest look at the data that we are given here, especially in the United States, will recognize that abortion has a myriad of complications downstream. And so we're not saying that those complications don't happen or don't exist, but ultimately when a woman walks her child into the assassin, which is what that doctor is, it's the baby who's being murdered and thrown away, not the woman.
Yeah, that idea of reproductive, of health. What we're trying to say is, please, dear lady, you're going to do something you're going to regret.
Yeah.
it's going to have disastrous physical consequences on you. It will have disastrous effects on your conscience.
Yeah.
You are going to be heartbroken. And in spite of all those who say, shout your abortion, that was kind of a big deal a few years ago. Let's be honest and say that I think what you're trying to do is trying to fight against your conscience, which is going to bother you and is bothering you as a result of your abortion. But let me point out what Hebrews says, that it was the sacrifice of Christ, God giving his son in death. Hebrews 10 says, to cleanse your conscience.
Yeah.
There's only one sacrifice, there's only one death that has ever taken place that ever took care of anybody's conscience problems.
Yeah.
And that is in coming in faith
Yeah.
to Christ.
Yeah.
That's common objection number one. Objection number two, it's just a clump of cells.
Oh, yeah.
What do you say to that, Zach?
I'm a clump of cells. You're a clump of cells. Trillions of them.
A lot more than a zygote. Or they call it,
Yeah, I think
an
that
embryo or baby.
Yeah, I mean, like, listen, a lot of these are just they're euphemisms that people use because they know what they're doing.
Yeah,
and it's a sense that God has written. I don't know. Would you say that in that sense, God has written His ways on our hearts, that we know what a human being is? And so all of these are just euphemisms. I'm a clump of cells. You can't kill me. You're a clump of cells. We can't kill you.
Your toddler.
It's just it. And the nail on the coffin, as far as just being an abolitionist, as far as wanting to see abortion criminalized and abolished completely, was when we started to compare it to the euphemisms from history. The euphemisms that we see in history are, it's not a black person, it's property. My plantation, my choice, my property, my choice. If you don't like slavery, don't own a slave. Those are all euphemisms to push back against the fact that regardless of the color of your skin, God made all people in His image.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter the degree of pigment you have in your skin. We're brothers and sisters in Christ.
Yeah.
And that's what the abolitionists said back during slavery. And so it's just the same. It's just the same euphemisms being, made now. It's just a clump of cells. We just talked about my body, my choice. All of these are euphemisms for, I know it's a baby and I still want to kill it.
Yeah.
Because we're all made up of cells. That has never made any difference. So
isn't that interesting that those who are so rabidly pro-abortion are those who would also stand against the Bible and saying that, well, the Bible at times allowed slavery, so it's an immoral book.
Yeah.
When the very same mentality towards slavery in the 1800s is what they adopt toward the murder of children, right? They hold on to those very same arguments.
Right.
The idea of being on the right side of history, I think if history has proven itself, such as things with slavery, it's going to eventually come around. Abortion is going to be understood as the great wickedness that it is. And humanity is going to come to understand that.
Yeah.
You might as well embrace that reality now.
Yeah. Yeah. History is not going to look back on our country in this epoch of time as, I think, as people who are looked at as taken serious. Like, I think that we're going to look back on the way many people look back on slaveholders, like selfish, mean-spirited, evil people who just wanted to enslave somebody for their own benefit. History is not going to remember our modern day people like that very kindly.
Yeah.
And I think I think future generations are going to eventually look back on us like we were a bunch of nut jobs.
Yeah.
Because we would go as far as to kill our own children for the sake of convenience. The vast majority of the time, it's for convenience.
Yep.
And even in instances, I hope and pray that this would put some gasoline on the fire for churches. I don't think history is going to look back on us very kindly and say, okay, well, the 1 or 2% of women that were put in horrible positions and they chose to kill their children, where was the church? Or even the church, when it comes down to, Voddie Baucham's message at the G3, I really appreciated because he didn't just blast Romans 1, which everybody has read, Christianly speaking. But he's like, we have to understand it. The precursor to 18 verses 20, 18 through 26 or whatever it is verses 13 and 14. God poured out His wrath on the unrighteousness of men.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of precursors that have led to a culture that has just openly accepted abortion, and a lot of it is just our own sexual promiscuity, and the church's failure to preach against that.
To think about the current zeitgeist of our culture, the hatred that we have toward children in general, I think that's the basis for the human trafficking.
Oh yeah.
Not just our culture, but our world. That's the basis for abortion.
Yeah.
That's the basis for the mentality of so many women have today when they say, "I don't want to have a baby. I want to keep my body frame. I want to look pretty.
Right.
I don't want to have a baby." They're all just selfish, and they're going to make your life miserable. It's going to be terrible if you have a baby. Things like that.
You're bringing out an excellent point, though, because I think what you're hitting at is a foundational issue of our culture hates children because our culture hates biblical sexuality, and our culture hates the family. And so it's one of the things that I've been trying to contemplate going into another legislative session is how can we introduce laws that uplift the family? Can we introduce pieces of legislation that are pro-family?
Yeah. Psalm 127, verse 3, "Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb," listen, "is a reward."
Yeah.
It's a reward.
Yeah.
We have it completely backwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why, like, if I may be so bold to steal a line from James White, abortion is the sacrament of the left's religion. And I shouldn't even say the left. I should just say the pro-abort's religion, because there's people on the right that are pro-abortion too. What do I mean by a sacrament?
It's a religious right.
Yeah, it's a religious right.
It's part of their religion.
To use the example out of Leviticus where children were sacrificed to Moloch. Why were they sacrificed to Moloch? So they would have good crops, a fruitful year, et cetera, et cetera. Why does somebody have an abortion? Because they don't want to deal with the child. They need to go to, so often. And this is something that I would beg our listeners to go, don't take our word for it. Don't take my word for it. Go research yourself. There's thousands of videos out there. There's wonderful resources. Apologia is always my go-to resource. End Abortion Now is always my go-to resource. Go watch their videos. It's so consistent, time and time and time again. Are there women out there that are put in horrible situations or are coerced to have an abortion? Yeah, yes. But 98% of the time, it's I can't afford a baby. I need to go to college. I need to get a job. This is going to mess up my career. We weren't ready. I've got a car payment, something like that, whatever. In those instances, you are sacrificing your child to the God of this age so that you can get something in return.
I want to highlight what you said about Molech worship. The details of Molech worship were horrific. It was in the valley, I think it was called the Valley of Hinnom. They would sacrifice the child, and they would have drums beating in the background because as the child would cry, screaming, they would beat on drums so that they would drown out the sound of the baby's crying. Horrific evil that was perpetrated. And what that reminds me of is the many excuses we might make to say, it's really just a clump of cells. We're going to salve our own conscience. We're going to cover our own ears in a spiritual sense, in a belief sense, by downplaying what is actually taking place with this great evil.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It reminds me of Genesis 4. I was reading this. I want the Christian who's listening to, and who's maybe wrestling with these issues. This is not an exegesis of Genesis 4. This is just merely me making a scriptural observation. Cain and Abel. Abel is killed by his brother Cain, and there's an interaction between Cain as he tries to hide. Picking up in verse 9, in Genesis 4, then Yahweh said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" And he said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And he said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground." And so just to simply point out the fact that God, if we might be able to hide ourselves from the spiritual reality of abortion, God does not hide himself from the spiritual reality of abortion. He sees it. I don't even know. I don't know if Genesis 4 is teaching us that God quite literally hears the injustice in his own. God doesn't have ears, but you know what I mean. Whether God actually hears the injustice of this unjust murder or unjust killing, I should say. or if it's just, a scriptural euphemism for God saw what happened and understands what happened. I don't know. Either way, we have to understand and be very humbled by the fact that God sees every child that is aborted. He hears their blood that has been spilt unjustly, crying up to him from the ground. And so this isn't an issue that the Christian can ignore, because God speaks so specifically towards it. I remember reading this, and it was like it was just like an arrow to the heart, because I immediately thought of abortion.
Objection number 3. And this is kind of what Zach has brought up a little bit. What if it's in the case of rape and incest? Is abortion acceptable in the case of rape and incest? And my response to that is, as Zach had brought out, this is not the majority of instances. And I like Ben Shapiro brought this out as really helpful. What if, for the sake of argument, we might allow abortion in those instances? Would you agree that all of the rest of those abortions that are done purely out of convenience are evil and must be stopped? If the answer is no, then what's your real agenda?
Right.
Are you just trying to wedge in what might be an exception in order to create a rule?
Right. Yeah, I think that it shows the greater, like you said, the greater agenda that nobody really cares about whether the woman is a victim of rape or incest.
Yeah.
And so I don't think our culture cares about women and victims of rape or incest. Yeah. I think that what they care about is actually, and what's the irony in all of this is the pro-abort is the one abusing the woman.
Yeah.
They're taking them and using them as an example to justify their ungodly behavior. Yeah. And so, whereas the Christian response, I believe, is no, abortion should not be allowed in the cases of rape or incest, because that person is still an image bearer of God. They had nothing to do with the crime of their father. It's not a biblical punishment to punish a child for the crime of their father. This is kind of getting into God's law applied a little bit, but that's a kind of a side debate. I will say that perhaps it is a just punishment to give capital punishment to the rapist, but not the child.
Right.
And so I think that what you bring out is a great starting point, because it does expose the hypocrisy of the pro-abortion movement, that they're just simply using victims of crimes to advance their agenda, because they don't care about the 2%. Really, they just care about the 98 and having the right to kill their own child. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the Christian response is biblical justice for the rapist, and then the church coming in and walking alongside of, counseling and loving the woman who is going to keep her child and raise that child or give it up for adoption. I don't have the statistics in front of me. I wish I would have brought them along, but not that long ago I read the vast majority of women who are raped actually do keep their children. And it only adds to the psychological trauma of the rape when they abort their child.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That's enlightening. That's really helpful.
Yeah.
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
Objection 4, science is not unanimous that the baby in the womb constitutes life.
I don't even know how to respond to that.
Well, I can. I wrote the objection out, so I wrote my answers to the objections too. So here's a response, and this isn't original with me. So you would end the existence of something that you're not sure is alive?
Oh, yeah.
So one example that was brought out was, say, for example, you're driving down the road and you see something that looks like a big brown tarp that's in the middle of the road. It could be just a big, messed up paper bag that's in the middle of the road or whatever. But it might be a guy who got a little bum who got drunk, who fell asleep in the middle of the road, and he doesn't realize that he's done that, right? Yeah. Are you then going to proceed to run over whatever that thing is?
Yeah.
I think any sane person, anybody who I guess I would say is ordered in their conscience, rightly ordered in their conscience, is not going to run that thing over, not just for fear of law, but also I want to preserve this person's life in spite of what it might be the case. Same thing with abortion. You're not sure.
Yeah.
Why would you kill? Why would you end it? And I like what the one person said. Just because there's not a consensus doesn't mean there's not a right answer.
Yeah, I mean, for me, I guess my response to that, I don't know if sometimes I feel cruel in my responses to some of this. What comes to my mind is actually one of God's 10 commandments, and that's not bearing false witness against your neighbor. The baby in the womb is my neighbor, and to say that is not a baby would be bearing false witness against them. Listen, everybody knows the baby inside of the womb is a baby. Everybody knows where babies come from. I love your question. So this isn't at you. This is just speaking, kind of in general. Consensus is absolutely out that life starts at conception. Like every medical textbook on the planet teaches simple biology that human life begins when sperm and egg meet, and a new DNA, new, never seen before, never repeated before DNA is produced in the womb of the mother. And so the people that will argue that the consensus is not out on whether or not what is in the womb is a baby is just showing that, well, what I've quoted Joseph Boot in an earlier episode, and I guess if Christians are adopting this view, I would say it's an example of what Boot was talking about in his book on politics, and that we are now taking on the example or taking on the ideas of godless people. Yeah. That the idea, and this is the same thing that happened during slavery, that you have this idea of being a human being being divided with this idea of personhood. That you'll have people, and I've talked to these people before, that, yep, what is in the human being or what is in the womb is human, but it doesn't have personhood because it's not out of the womb. And so they need to be able to distinguish being a human being from personhood, and that's how they justify killing somebody in the womb. Right. To say that the consensus is not out on when life begins is absolute nonsense. Yeah. There are some people in the State House that are doctors. I would have no problem pulling them aside and asking if they still had their medical textbooks from med school and reading the biology section, because I can about guarantee you that their biology textbooks teach when life begins, and life begins at conception. And so the secular world is going to try to make it seem like that is not a consensus. It is, and it's undeniable. And again, it's just that is a fancy sounding euphemism for trying to separate person. In my opinion, it's a euphemism for trying to separate humans, being a human being and separating your personhood.
Right. There's all the different objections that are brought, like consciousness, right?
Right.
You're not conscious. Well, then would you kill somebody in a coma? Is it okay to, it's dependency is another one. Okay, so you're going to kill a toddler because a toddler is entirely dependent on mom. It's like, this is not a logic-based. I think if we really examined our hearts, if our desire is to justify abortion, it is understandably and clearly because we have an evil agenda, something that needs to be changed and reoriented. And again, the way that happens is through the gospel. There's forgiveness, there's cleansing, there's transformation. All of these things take place for the one who has made these mistakes before. If they come to Christ, if they turn away from their sins and trust in the work of Christ alone to save them, He's here for sinners, and you're one of them, listener.
Yeah, I mean, can we, as much as we're talking about abortion, I think it's safe to take a step back and just acknowledge that what is the enemy's agenda? To steal, kill, and destroy. The enemy's work in the area of abortion is his same work in the area of adultery. It's the same work in tempting my flesh to do things that God would not have me do, that would destroy my own family. And
Jesus said that he's been a murderer from the beginning.
Been a murderer from the beginning.
He was there, I think, affecting Cain against Abel all the way.
Absolutely. And you take one step back into the garden. Did God really say, And so, well, the topic at hand that is abortion, and it's great to talk about abortion as I think that we do a pretty good job here on Theologic of addressing cultural issues that affect our listening, our listening audience. Thank you. We have to recognize that abortion isn't the sin. It is a sin,
right,
but it is an example of a heinous sin that is being accepted by our culture.
Yeah.
And so the enemy seeks to steal, kill, and destroy in my life.
Yeah.
But abortion is for some reason just so vastly and widely accepted
I think
in our culture.
I think if people really understood, because the idea, again, the common charge is you're just trying to exert power. What you're saying is not actually good, or it's not actually beneficial. This is just you trying to throw your religion out. I think what you need to recognize is that God is the one who, in his prescriptions on how we are to live, these are indeed for our own good, for our own life. We need to understand this important principle, right? There is no victimless sin. No victimless sin. The same people who like to stand and say that, the only thing that's bad to do is the only thing that's wrong to do is if you hurt somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
Every single sin really does harm another person. Even homosexuality, all of the things that we grow to accept are actually indeed extremely harmful.
Yeah.
And there's a reason behind why God says this is something that you must not do.
Yeah.
Not only is it not good for your relationship with him or anything, or according to his prescriptive purposes, but it is destructive to yourself, to other people. The things that you love and that are evil are things that are going to destroy you. You must turn from them.
And the gospel changing one's heart is the answer to all of that. Yeah. And I think that we need to make sure that we preach that and we say that not in a facetious sense at all. Like, oh yeah, whatever, the gospel, abortion, the gospel, adultery, whatever. No. The reason why anybody would want to engage in that behavior is because they are a slave. Jesus says you're a slave to your sin or you're a slave to him. And those are your options.
Yeah.
And so people engaging in this behavior are slaves to their own sin.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. So how do we end abortion?
I think we preach the gospel in the public square. I think we're churches that are actively engaged in not just saving babies, but ministering to women.
Yeah. That's good.
I think the church is absent in the public square, so to speak.
Yeah.
And we need to be more active. I think when public square for me has turned into just a broad description of not just preaching the gospel on Sundays.
Yeah.
It means evangelism. It could mean street preaching. I don't know. It could mean going to abortion clinics. It could mean
the internet.
Yeah.
Right. This is the marketplace of ideas. This is why we do our podcast.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And so it's being bold and preaching God's truth and not compromising with the culture and not compromising our message with the world. Yeah. And it's Christians being convicted enough by the Word of God to go out and be Christians who love women, rescue children. Abortion is one topic among many where the church could be more active and involved. I know Zach brought up sex trafficking and child trafficking. My wife and I have been contemplating what it looks like to maybe foster care someday. Can our home be an open home to battered women or children who have been rescued out of this environment? I mean, Christians, this is how all of this stuff gets combated.
I think to end abortion, the first thing that has to happen is, as the gospel is being preached, what we're wanting to affect is a change in people's mindsets. This sort of anti-children mindset that's currently in our world needs to die.
Great point.
If that died,
great point.
I think we would have the seeds for a change when it comes to the gospel. That needs to be the starting point.
Yeah.
Children are viewed as a hindrance to our own self-important goals and our self-improvement. And when we understand its own vanity, when culture moves away from that sort of self-centered mentality, that sort of thing dies. So minds need to change to understand, in fact, what a rich treasure that women and men give up when they abort their children. When we change our minds to see that the fruit of the womb is a reward, it comes with a responsibility. I think people think that it's going to affect my self desires. What it'll do is it'll affect your selfishness.
Oh yeah.
And that will make you a better person. And maybe not perfectly. I mean, there's more to it that needs to take place.
Right.
But a child is a unique gift from God to better you.
Yeah.
The real self-improvement you need, dear one who's pregnant and contemplating aborting your child, the self-improvement you need comes from the very one that God is giving you as a reward for as a blessing to you.
Yeah.
You need that. The real self-improvement, not what you think your self-improvement is, that's only going to lead to misery.
Yeah.
The attempt at looking sexy in the gym, you're going to die anyway. You're going to get to be 40, you're going to be 50, your body is going to break down and age, but a child who's going to surround you when you're in your deathbed, you're going to be alone.
Yeah.
If you decide to have no children and so on. This mentality is so present focused, and we're losing our future as a result. So minds need to change on that, and hearts need to change to see God's great forgiveness and cleansing.
Great point on the family. How is abortion going to be ended? One way is by the church uplifting the family.
Yeah.
Preaching to take care of our kids, preaching God's word to have more kids, and to raise up your children in the fear and admonition of the Lord.
Yeah.
We have such an anti-family culture. We have such an anti-biblical marriage culture.
Yeah.
And the church needs to, it just goes back to what Vodi is talking about. The precursor to Romans 1 is all of these other things we let in the back door before God's wrath and all the descriptors of God's wrath being poured out. Yeah. And so we need to be a culture that's pro-family. Yeah. And so I hope that in any role that we all might have, whether it's here on the podcast, here at your church, Sean's church, my church, maybe me being down at the legislature, we want to be pro-family. So,
one thing I want to say by way of encouragement, because this topic can be really discouraging, we consider the weight our culture is under with this great evil. But I want us to take heart. God is already at work. The seeds of the end of abortion is really already here. Adults with an anti-children mindset, what's going to happen? They won't have kids, most likely. And what happens when they die? They won't be passing on this mentality. But those who have a high view of family, marriage, relationships, they will be the ones who, in nurturing their children, will have what they need with those kids to affect the future. God is already at work ending this evil. Tyranny and evil has the seeds of its own demise embedded in it, and it will end. So my encouragement to you, dear parent, you who love Christ, who have kids, go boldly into affecting them positively for the future, and nurture them, raise them, bring them up in that nurture and admonition. That nurture meaning the tender care that a child needs. Admonition means a strict warning, because there is great evil in this world. Protect them from it. And by that, we will affect the next generation for the better. And by that, we will see institutions change. God is already at work. See what he's doing. Join yourself along with it. Okay?
Amen.
Amen. Thanks for joining us on this episode of Theologic. Lord bless you, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. You take care.